Have you ever imagined what a tug of war between two ships would be like? Well, that's exactly what happened in 1845, all to determine which propulsion system was superior, the ship with a propeller or paddle wheels? Victorian engineering was indeed peculiar. It was the beginning of the application of steam engines in boats, and the convention of the time was to use these paddle wheels on the sides. An idea inspired by the traditional water wheels of mills, and which worked well on boats that sailed through the calm waters of rivers and lakes. But it had serious problems when used by ships on the high seas. One thing that comes to mind when we think of the sea is the waves, right? And they were a serious problem for this type of propulsion. As the ships sailed through rough seas, one of the paddle wheels could become almost submerged, while the other was almost out of the water, exerting enormous and uneven stress on the engine, something that often led to mechanical problems. Another problem with using side paddle wheels was their inefficiency in transferring power from the engine to the boat's movement. During most of the wheel's cycle, energy was spent moving water up and down, and only at this point was the energy actually used to push the water back and propel the ship forward. Not very advantageous, right? There's more. From a military perspective, looking through the eyes of the Royal British Navy, which was the interested party in this story, paddle wheel propulsion created even more problems. Besides the noise that revealed the position, they occupied a large space on the side of the vessel, reducing the area available for positioning cannons, which were still mounted laterally. By the way, in the heat of battle, they were an easy target for enemy fire, leaving the ship without propulsion. Problems that a propeller in the submerged part of the ship promised to solve. By being completely submerged, it prevented overloading the engines and allowed most of the energy to be directed toward propelling the ship forward, in addition to being mechanically simpler compared to paddle wheels, reducing the risk of failures. Moreover, the propeller is one of those inventions that appeared in different places almost simultaneously, leading to multiple claims of authorship. Many references even suggest that the idea came from Archimedes' screw, which, by the way, he didn't invent, as this type of screw was used much earlier to pump water in places like ancient Egypt. The fact is that the first propeller design started with a shape very similar to this screw, but soon evolved into a simpler design with two blades, a refined design that was installed on HMS Rattler, one of the characters in our story. At that time, propeller propulsion did not yet have the confidence that paddle wheel propulsion had already gained. Being a mechanical element that required a shaft to pass through the submerged part of the ship, the fear of installing this type of propulsion was understandable, especially without knowing if it was truly advantageous. As naval engineering at that time heavily relied on practical experimentation, and the doubt about which propulsion system was better still persisted, the idea emerged to put both systems to test on similar ships. They would first compete in a race to see which ship was faster, and then in a tug of war to see which was more efficient in transmitting engine power to propulsion. The two ships selected for the test were indeed very similar. Both the HMS Rattler and the HMS Alecto had 200 horsepower steam engines and very close tonnage displacement. The main difference was that the Rattler had a two-blade propeller propulsion system, while the Alecto had side paddle wheels. And despite the Rattler being slightly longer and having an additional mast, it was the Alecto that had the greater tonnage displacement due precisely to the weight of the paddle wheel system. The first test took place in March 1845 when the two ships raced for 129 kilometers in calm seas, and Rattler won with a 24-minute lead. Later, on a 100-kilometer course in rough seas, the test was repeated, and Rattler defeated Alecto again with a 40-minute lead. The final and most decisive test was the tug-of-war between the two ships, held on April 3, 1845. The sea was calm, and the vessels were connected stern to stern by a rope. Soon, both ships powered up their engines to full steam and set off in opposite directions. It didn't take long for the Rattler to start dragging the Alecto at a speed of 4 km/h, proving the advantage of the propeller as a naval propulsor and convincing the Admiralty that this was the most suitable system for their ships. As a result, from 1845 onwards, all new warships of the Royal British Navy began to be driven by propellers. The Rattler's story also has a connection with the history of Brazil. After these tests, both frigates were deployed to patrol the African coast and curb the slave trade in the region. Thanks to the modern propeller, the Rattler could reach and capture the sailboats used in this terrible trade, even when there was no wind. Between 1849 and 1851, the ship's commander, Arthur Cummings, claimed to have liberated more than 850 slaves and captured the notorious Brazilian sailboat called Andorinha in the Gulf of Guinea. The Andorinha had already evaded British patrols 11 times before being seized by the Rattler. Subsequently, in 1851, the Rattler was sent to patrol the eastern waters, where it was involved in the Second Anglo-Burmese War and a battle against Chinese pirates near Hong Kong in 1855. In this episode, with the assistance of American ships, 20 boats like this one, called junks, were destroyed. Who would have thought that a tug of war between two ships could involve so much history, right? Well, I'll stop here. If you liked the video, consider giving it a like below. Thank you for your company, and until next time,